You two pack up and leave my house. Now." I said this at 7:14 on a Friday evening in mid-autumn, in the kitchen of my own house at the end of a cul-de-sac on Pinewood Lane in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to my 63-year-old mother, Lorraine, and my 29-year-old sister, Camille, both of whom were living in my guest bedroom and on the pull-out couch in my finished basement, respectively, for the previous 3 months and 11 days. The room went quiet. My wife, Lila, who was standing at the stove with our 2-year-old son Atlas on her left hip, stirring a pot of chicken and dumplings with her right hand, looked up at me with the kind of expression I hadn't seen on her face in approximately 7 years. She did not say anything. Atlas, whose fever was 102 degrees, an ear infection waking him up every 2 hours for the previous 4 nights, and a pair of dried tear tracks on both cheeks from the most recent waking, looked up at me, too. He blinked. He said, "Daddy," I said. "Hi, buddy," I said. "I'm home. Buddy, I want to tell you, in the next several minutes, how a 38-year-old industrial HVAC sales representative who hadn't raised his voice at a member of his own family in 11 years ended up standing in his own kitchen on a Friday evening in mid-autumn, telling his mother and his sister to pack up and leave. I want to tell you who else was in that kitchen. I want to tell you what my wife was doing for the previous 3 months and 11 days. While I was driving a 2019 Toyota Camry through a 4-state regional sales territory and telling myself, in the careful private accounting of a man who did not want to acknowledge what was happening inside his own home, that things were probably fine. My name is Holden Whitaker. I'm 38 years old. I sell industrial heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems to commercial property managers, small manufacturing facilities, and regional school districts across eastern Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. I have been doing this for 14 years. I work out of a regional office in Lancaster. On weekdays, I am not on the road, and on the road approximately 3 or 4 days a week, every week, since my son Atlas was born. My wife Lila is 32 years old. She is a former elementary school teacher who took an indefinite leave of absence from her position at Pine Grove Elementary in the school district of Lancaster 2 years ago, 6 weeks after Atlas was born, when our pediatrician told us that Atlas had an unusual sensitivity to common daycare-borne respiratory infections, and that he would be considerably better off for the first 2 or 3 years of his life at home with one of his parents. The one of his parents who stayed home was Lila. We talked about it. We agreed on it. She did not at any point in those 2 years say to me, in the careful, even voice of a woman who's been thinking about saying something for several months, but has not yet decided whether she has the right to say it, that the arrangement was making her unhappy. She did not say it because, by my own quiet accounting of the past 2 years, it was not making her unhappy. What was making her unhappy was something else. I'll get to it. My father, Earl Whitaker, died of a heart attack in the parking lot of a Sheetz gas station outside Reading, Pennsylvania, 4 years ago. He was 64 years old. He was picking up a bag of pork rinds and a Diet Mountain Dew on his way home from his job as a regional sales manager at a steel fabrication company in Berks County, which was the same job he was doing for the same company since I was 11 years old. My mother, Lorraine, after the funeral, moved into a 2-bedroom condominium on the south side of Reading. The condominium was approximately 45 minutes from our house in Lancaster. My mother kept it spotless. She kept it spotless in the particular way. A woman who spent the previous 4 decades of her life keeping her husband's house spotless keeps her own condominium spotless after he is gone, because she does not know what else to do with the previously occupied parts of her day. She visited us in the first 3 years after my father died, approximately twice a month. She drove down on Saturday mornings. She stayed for the afternoon. She drove back Saturday evening. She did not stay overnight. She did not interfere with our routines. She held Atlas, when he was little, with the careful hands of a grandmother who'd held 2 of her own babies before him, and was relearning the small particular motion that, With each new grandchild, takes a few weeks to come back. She and Lila were polite to each other. They were not close. I'll get to it. My sister Camille is 9 years younger than I am. She was 9 years old when I left for college. She was 19 years old when she married a man named Dante Marchetti at a Catholic church in Reading. He was 26 years old at the time of the wedding. He was working then as a regional supervisor at a chain of car dealerships owned by his uncle. He is currently working as the same regional supervisor at the same chain of car dealerships, and is also currently the father of Camille's 2 children, Mira, who is 5 years old, and Bram, who is 3. Camille and Dante separated 3 months and 11 days ago. I do not know in detail why Camille and Dante separated. I know what Camille told my mother, which is that Dante became controlling and emotionally unavailable over the previous several years, and that she could not live in the house anymore. I know what my mother told me on a phone call from her condominium in Reading on the Tuesday afternoon after the separation, which was that Camille needed somewhere to go, and that she was not going to be able to stay at my mother's condominium, because the condominium had only 1 bedroom and Camille was going to need her own space, and that the 2 of them were going to come stay with Lila and me in our 4-bedroom house on Pinewood Lane in Lancaster for a couple of weeks while Camille figured out her next steps. I said on the phone call, "Mom, I'd want to talk to Lila about that first." My mother said, "Holden, this is your sister." I said, "I know it's my sister. I still want to talk to Lila." My mother said, "Holden, I am asking you as your mother. Your sister needs you. She needs us, the 2 of us, getting in the car tomorrow morning. We will be at your house by lunchtime." I called Lila. I told her what my mother said. I asked her what she thought. Lila said, "Holden, of course they can come." I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "Holden, your sister is leaving her husband. Your mother is bringing her here. Of course they can come." I said, "It's not going to be easy." She said, "I know. It's still the right thing to do. They can have the guest bedroom and the basement. We will figure it out." I drove home that night from a sales call in Pittsburgh. My mother and my sister arrived at our house in Lancaster the following afternoon in my mother's 2014 Buick Enclave, with 11 cardboard boxes and 4 suitcases and a fabric pet carrier containing my sister's diabetic Persian cat Whitman. They moved into the guest bedroom in the basement. I want to tell you about the first 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks were, by any reasonable accounting, fine. My mother helped with Atlas in the afternoons. She held him during his fussy hour while Lila finished cooking dinner. She read him picture books on the living room couch. She made the bed in the guest bedroom every morning. She did not, in the first 2 weeks, criticize Lila's cooking, comment on the cleanliness of the floors, or complain about the temperature of the house. My sister was in the first 2 weeks mostly absent. She spent her afternoons in the basement, on her phone, talking, in a voice traveled through the floorboards in a way the previous owner of our house did not, by any reasonable accounting, anticipate, to her divorce attorney, her therapist, her best friend from high school, and a man whose name I did not catch but whose voice she modulated in a way that suggested he was not her divorce attorney. She came upstairs for meals. She thanked Lila for the meals. She did not in the first 2 weeks criticize the meals. The 2 weeks turned into 3. The 3 turned into 5. The 5 turned into 8. I want to tell you about the accumulating shifts. Around the end of the first month, my mother began commenting on Lila's cooking. The comments were small. They were not, individually, the kind of comment a reasonable man would walk into his own kitchen and stand up against. They were the kind of comment that, in isolation, could be interpreted as advice. "Lila, you might try a little more salt next time." "Lila, the chicken is a little dry." "Lila, Atlas might eat more if you cut the carrots smaller." Lila absorbed the comments without responding, I noticed. I did not, in the kitchen of my own house, say anything to my mother about the comments. I will get to why I did not say anything to my mother. Around the end of the second month, my sister began leaving her dishes on the kitchen counter overnight. She left her wine glasses next to the sink. She left her cereal bowls on the coffee table in the living room. She left her wet bath towels on the floor of the upstairs hallway bathroom, which was the bathroom we'd all agreed she would be using during her stay, and which was also the bathroom my wife and I needed to walk past in the early morning when Atlas woke up crying with the ear infection that hadn't, at the end of the second month, started, but which would, by the beginning of the third month, become the central organizing fact of our family's nighttime schedule. Lila picked up the dishes. Lila picked up the towels. Lila washed the wine glasses and put them away. I noticed. I did not say anything. I'll get to it. Around the middle of the third month, Atlas started running fevers. The fevers were intermittent at first. He would run 101-degree fever in the afternoon, sleep it off by bedtime, and wake up the next morning without a temperature. Then he would run another fever 2 days later. Then 3 days later, then every day. Lila called our pediatrician. Our pediatrician, a woman named Dr. Magnolia Ostrovsky, who has been practicing in Lancaster for the previous 26 years and who delivered Atlas at Lancaster General Hospital 2 years ago, told Lila that the fevers were probably a recurrent ear infection. She prescribed amoxicillin. The amoxicillin helped for about 4 days. The fevers came back. Dr. Ostrowski switched him to a stronger antibiotic. She told us that if the new antibiotic didn't work, she would refer us to a pediatric ENT specialist at Penn State Health for tube surgery. The new antibiotic was, by the Friday evening in mid-autumn that I came home from my 4-day sales trip, on its third day. I was traveling that week through a rotation of regional sales calls in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. I'd left on Tuesday morning. I'd called Lila every night from the road. I'd asked her, on every call, how Atlas was doing. She told me, on every call, in the careful, tired voice of a woman who'd been awake for the previous 5 nights, that he was holding steady. I'd asked her on every call how she was doing. She'd told me she was fine. I believed her on the first 3 calls, the way a man believes a woman he's been married to for 7 years when she tells him, in the careful, tired voice of a woman who is not going to ask for help, that she is fine. I believed her on the 4th call less. I want to tell you about the 4th call. It was the Thursday night of the 4-day trip. I was in a Holiday Inn Express off Interstate 71 in Cleveland. I'd finished a sales call at a regional manufacturing facility in the early evening. I'd eaten a hamburger at a Bob Evans next to the hotel. I'd gone back to the room. I called my wife after dinner, which was the time I called her every night when I was on the road, which was a private ritual the 2 of us were maintaining for the previous 7 years. She picked up on the 3rd ring. She said, "Hey," I said. "Hey, how is he tonight?" She said, "About the same. The new antibiotic seems to be helping a little, but he's still running a low-grade fever. He went down right before 7. He woke up before 8. He's been up since." I said, "I'm sorry, Lila." She said, "Don't be sorry, Holden. You're working." I said, "How are you?" She paused. She said, "I'm fine." I said, "Lila." She said, "I'm fine, Holden. I promise." I said, "Is she still there?" She said, "Yeah." "They're both still here." I said, "Are they helping?" She said, "They're trying." I want to tell you what "they're trying" sounded like in my wife's voice on a Thursday evening in mid-autumn, after the 3rd day of an antibiotic that was supposed to be working and was not yet, by the careful private accounting of a mother who'd been awake every 2 hours for the previous 5 nights, working enough. It sounded like a woman who was not going to say the true thing. It sounded like a woman who decided several months ago that the true thing was not going to be useful to say. It sounded like my wife. I asked her if she needed me to come home a day early. She said, "No, finish the trip. I'll see you tomorrow night." I said, "Lila." She said, "Holden, I love you." "Finish the trip. We'll see you tomorrow." I said, "I love you too." I hung up. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed in the Holiday Inn Express off Interstate 71 in Cleveland for about 11 minutes without turning on the television. I should have driven home that night. I drove to Cincinnati the next morning. I finished the Cincinnati sales call in the late morning. I drove home from Cincinnati to Lancaster on Friday afternoon, about an 8-hour drive. mostly on Interstate 71 and Interstate 76 through the kind of rolling Ohio and Pennsylvania farmland that, in mid-autumn, looks the way an industrial HVAC sales representative wants the world to look when he is driving home on a Friday afternoon to a wife and a son he has been worried about for the previous 24 hours. I pulled into the driveway a few minutes after 7. I sat in the car for 3 minutes before getting out. I do not know, in retrospect, exactly what I was thinking about during those 3 minutes. I know I was thinking about my wife. I know I was thinking about Atlas. I know I was not thinking, in any specific or coherent way, about what I was going to do when I walked into my own kitchen 3 minutes later. I want to tell you what I saw when I walked into my own kitchen at 7:14 on the Friday evening in mid-autumn. The house, from the driveway, looked normal. The porch light was on. The living room light was on. There was a Subaru Outback parked in the driveway behind Lila's Honda Civic, which was Camille's car, with 3 bumper stickers on the rear windshield. One for a yoga studio in Reading, one for a college sorority Camille hadn't been a member of for 10 years, and one that said bed. Namaste, but in bed I unlocked the front door. I walked into the foyer. I set my overnight bag down on the floor next to the front closet. I heard, from the kitchen, the sound of a wooden spoon hitting the inside rim of a soup pot. I heard, from the kitchen, the sound of Atlas crying. I heard, from the kitchen, the sound of my mother's voice, which was the voice she uses when she is reading a magazine article aloud to no one in particular, and would like to be told she is not reading it aloud to no one in particular. I walked from the foyer to the kitchen. I want to tell you what I saw. My wife was standing at the stove. She was wearing a pair of black leggings that I recognized as the same leggings she'd been wearing the night I left for Pittsburgh on Tuesday morning. She was wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt that I recognized as one of mine. Her hair was pulled back into the kind of half-collapsed ponytail a woman wears when she hasn't had time, in the previous 4 days, to wash her hair. There were dried baby food stains on the left shoulder of the sweatshirt, and a small patch of what looked like dried baby aspirin on the right sleeve. She was holding Atlas on her left hip. Atlas was crying. He was not crying in the loud, insistent way a toddler cries when he is being told he cannot have a cookie. He was crying in the quiet, exhausted way a toddler cries when he has been in pain for 4 days and has, in the careful private accounting of a 2-year-old who does not have the words yet for what is happening to him, run out of the energy to keep crying loudly. Lila was stirring a pot of chicken and dumplings with her right hand. The counter behind her was covered with dishes. There were 2 empty wine glasses next to the sink. There was a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the kitchen table. There was an unopened bottle of children's Tylenol on the counter next to the stove. There were 3 Amazon packages, 2 of them addressed to Camille Whitaker and one of them addressed to Lorraine Whitaker, stacked on the kitchen island. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table. She was holding her iPad. She was reading what appeared, from the distance I was standing at, to be a Wirecutter review of luxury bath towels. My sister was sitting on the couch in the living room. Visible through the open doorway between the kitchen and the living room, with her bare feet on the coffee table, a glass of red wine in her left hand, and her phone in her right. She was laughing at something on her phone. Atlas was still crying. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen. My mother looked up from her iPad. She saw me. She said, in the voice she uses when she is interrupting her own thought to acknowledge the existence of a person who has just walked into the room, "Oh, Holden, you're home." She looked back down at her iPad. She said, without looking up, in the careful, even voice of a woman who has been waiting for the right moment to say a thing she has been thinking about for several minutes, "Leela, this chicken is going to be dry again. You really should follow the recipe I gave you." That was the moment. That was the moment I want to tell you about. It wasn't, by any reasonable accounting of what had been happening in my own house for the previous 3 months, the worst thing my mother had said. It wasn't the worst thing I'd heard her say. It was not by any reasonable accounting of what an angry man might be expected to react to, the kind of comment that would normally cause a 38-year-old industrial vac sales representative to stand in the doorway of his own kitchen and say what I was about to say. But I saw in the 4 seconds between when my mother spoke and when I responded the expression on my wife's face. She did not look up. She kept stirring the chicken and dumplings. She moved Atlas on her left hip to a slightly more comfortable position. She closed her eyes for about half a second. She opened them. She said, in the careful, even voice of a woman practicing this particular tone of voice for the previous 3 months and 11 days, "I'll try the recipe next time, Lorraine." I looked at my wife. I looked at my mother. I looked at my sister on the couch in the living room, who hadn't yet looked up from her phone. I looked at Atlas. I said, "You two, pack up and leave my house." The room went quiet. My mother set down her iPad. She turned her head slowly in my direction. She looked at me with the kind of expression a woman wears when she has been certain, for the previous 63 years of her life, that the world is one way and has been told, by a person she has not previously considered capable of telling her this, that the world is, in fact, a different way. She said, "Holden," I said. "Mom," she said, "what did you just say to me?" I said, "Pack up and leave my house now, both of you, tonight." Kamite Meal looked up from her phone. She said, "Holden, what is going on?" I said, "Camille, get off the couch, go to the basement, pack your stuff, get in your car, drive to Mom's condominium in Reading. Sleep on the floor of her 1-bedroom condominium tonight. Figure out the rest of your life starting tomorrow morning. I do not care where you live. You are not living here anymore." My mother stood up. She said, "Holden Whitaker, you are not going to speak to your sister that way." I said, "Mom, I am not going to speak to her that way. I am going to speak to you that way. Do you want to know why?" My mother said, "Holden." I said, "I am going to tell you why. I want to tell you what I said next." I said it in the careful, steady voice of a man who'd been holding a thing inside himself for 3 months and 11 days and discovered, in the moment of finally saying it out loud, that the thing was less complicated than he thought it was. I said, "Mom, my wife has been awake for 5 nights in a row with our sick child. She was cooking 3 meals a day for 4 adults and 1 toddler in a kitchen that does not belong to either of you. She was washing the dishes. You and Camille leave on the counter. She was picking up the towels. Camille leaves on the bathroom floor. She was receiving Amazon packages addressed to the 2 of you and bringing them into the kitchen because neither of you can be bothered to walk to the front porch when the doorbell rings. She was listening to you for 3 months and 11 days criticize her cooking, her childcare, her cleaning, her appearance, and her decision to take a leave of absence from a teaching job she loved in order to stay home with a child who has medical complications neither of you have asked about a single time since the day you arrived. My mother said, "Holden, that is not," I said. "Mom, I am not finished, Camille. I am not finished with you either, so sit down." Camille, who was halfway up off the couch with her wineglass still in her hand, sat back down. I said, "I want to tell you something I'd been thinking about for the previous 4 days. I was driving through Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. I was calling my wife every night. She was telling me on every call that she is fine. She is not fine. She has not been fine for 3 months. She has not been fine because the 2 of you have been treating her, in her own house, like she is your unpaid housekeeper, and I was not here to see it. And the only reason I was not here to see it, in the careful, honest accounting of a man who has been paying attention to his own life for the previous half hour, is that I have not wanted to see it." I paused. I said, "I am seeing it now." I looked at Lila. She was looking at me. She still hadn't put down the wooden spoon. She still hadn't put down Atlas. I said, "Leela, I am sorry. I am sorry I did not see this sooner. I am sorry I did not say this sooner. I am sorry for the past 3 months. I am going to be a different person in this house starting tonight. I want you to give me a chance to be a different person. I am going to start by telling these 2 to leave. And then I am going to start, for the rest of my life, by being the kind of husband I should have been 3 months ago. Lila did not say anything. She nodded once. She turned back to the stove. She kept stirring the chicken and dumplings. I looked at my mother. I said, "Mom, pack your bag. You are going home tonight." I looked at Camille. I said, "Camille, pack the boxes. You are going to Mom's tonight." I looked at Atlas. I said, "Atlas, Daddy's home, buddy." He said, "Daddy, I want to tell you what happened in the next 90 minutes." My mother walked upstairs to the guest bedroom. She closed the door behind her. I could hear, from the hallway, the careful sounds of a 63-year-old woman packing a suitcase in the kind of stiff, offended silence that suggested she was not going to give me the satisfaction of crying about what just happened in the kitchen. She came downstairs 83 minutes later with her 2 suitcases and a tote bag. She did not look at me. She walked out the front door. She got into her Buick Enclave. She started the engine. She backed down the driveway. She drove north on Pinewood Lane. I did not, in the 83 minutes between when my mother walked upstairs and when she walked out the front door, say a single additional word to her. She did not say a single additional word to me. My sister Camille took considerably longer. She spent the first 20 minutes of the 83 minutes calling, in succession, our mother on her cell phone. Even though our mother was upstairs in the guest bedroom and could have been spoken to in person, our cousin Renee, our Aunt Lorraine, the other one, and a man whose name I caught this time, which was Tobias, and whose voice she modulated in the same way she'd been modulating it for the previous 3 months in the basement. She came up from the basement after the 3rd or 4th phone call with 2 cardboard boxes and a fabric pet carrier. The fabric pet carrier contained Whitman, the diabetic Persian cat. She set the boxes down in the foyer. She looked at me. She said, "Holden, I cannot believe you are doing this to me." I said, "Camille, I am not doing this to you. I am doing this for my wife. The fact that the same thing happens to be doing it to you is a coincidence I am not going to apologize for," she said. "You are my brother." I said, "Camille, I am still your brother. I am going to be your brother for the rest of our lives. The 2 of us are going to figure out, sometime in the next several months, how to have a relationship that does not involve you living in my house and treating my wife like she is the help. I am not going to start figuring it out tonight. Tonight, you are going to put your boxes in your car. Tonight, you are going to drive to Mom's condominium. I will be in touch." She loaded 11 cardboard boxes and 4 suitcases and the pet carrier into the back of her Subaru Outback over the next 38 minutes. I helped her with the last 3 boxes. She did not say anything to me as I carried them out. She did not say anything to Lila. She drove away about 90 minutes after my mother left. I went back into the kitchen. Lila was sitting at the kitchen table. She finally put Atlas down. He was sitting on the floor by her feet, holding a plastic stegosaurus he received for his 2nd birthday from Lila's mother in Pittsburgh, who was a woman my mother never approved of and never, in 7 years of marriage, invited to anything. Lila looked up. She said, "Holden." I said, "Lila." She said, "Don't thank me. I should have done this 3 months ago." She said, "I know. I'm still going to thank you." I sat down at the kitchen table. I looked at Atlas. I looked at Lila. I said, "I am going to be a different person." She said, "I believe you." I said, "I am sorry." She said, "I know. I forgive you." She said it in the careful, steady voice of a woman who'd been waiting for 3 months and 11 days to say it. I want to tell you about the 3 months that followed. Atlas got tube surgery at Penn State Health. 12 days after the Friday evening in mid-autumn, the surgery was uncomplicated. The fevers stopped within a week of the surgery. He started sleeping through the night within 3 weeks of the surgery. He started saying full 3-word sentences within 5 weeks of the surgery, which Dr. Ostrowski told us was probably related, in some careful indirect way, to the fact that he could finally hear the sentences his parents said to him without the constant background pressure of fluid in his middle ear. Leela went back to teaching on a part-time basis in the spring semester at Pine Grove Elementary. She taught 2 mornings a week. I rearranged my sales territory to cover the 2 mornings she was at work. My mother did not speak to me for 41 days after she drove out of our driveway. She called me on the 42nd day. She did not apologize. She said she'd been thinking. She said she would like to come visit her grandson on a Saturday afternoon if I would let her. I told her she could. She drove down from Reading on a Saturday afternoon. She stayed for 2 hours. She did not stay overnight. She did not criticize Lila's cooking. She held Atlas for the first hour and a half. She drove back to Reading. She has visited approximately twice a month since. Camille has not spoken to me since the night she drove away from our driveway. She has not, by my best private accounting of what I have heard from various cousins, reconciled with Dante. She has not, by the same accounting, moved out of my mother's one-bedroom condominium. She is, by the same accounting, working at an organic grocery store in Reading, which is approximately as much of a career adjustment as a 29-year-old woman who has spent the previous 10 years not working can reasonably be expected to make in the first 6 months of a divorce. I have not in the previous 3 months called her. I want to tell you about a Tuesday night. It was about 3 weeks ago. I was home from a sales trip to Cleveland for about 6 hours. I ate dinner with Lila and Atlas at the kitchen table. I gave Atlas his bath. I read him 3 picture books. I put him to bed in the early evening. Lila and I watched an episode of a television show neither of us was able to follow closely enough to remember the names of any of the characters, and we went to bed at 10. I woke up in the early hours of the morning to the sound of Atlas crying in the next room. It was not the same crying it was 4 months ago. It was the thin, frustrated crying of a toddler who is teething. Lila started to get up. I put my hand on her shoulder. I said, "Stay in bed. I've got him," she said. "Are you sure?" I said. "I'm sure." I walked down the hallway. I picked Atlas up out of his crib. I carried him to the rocking chair in the corner of his room. I sat down. I rocked him. He cried for about 11 minutes. He stopped. He looked up at me. He said, "Daddy?" I said, "Yeah, buddy, I'm here." He said, "Stay." I said, "I'm staying, buddy, as long as you want." He fell asleep on my chest about 4 minutes later. I sat in the rocking chair in the corner of his room with my 2-year-old son asleep on my chest for the next 43 minutes. I did not put him back in the crib until the sky outside his bedroom window started to turn the kind of careful pale gray that happens in midwinter in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, about an hour before sunrise. I walked back down the hallway to our bedroom. Lila was asleep. She was breathing in the steady, regular way a woman breathes when she has been sleeping, uninterrupted, for the previous 5 hours. I lay down next to her. I did not fall asleep. I lay in bed, in the early morning gray of a Wednesday in midwinter, and I thought about the 3 months and 11 days I'd spent ignoring what was happening in my own house, and the 4 days I'd spent driving through Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati while my wife was awake every 2 hours with our sick child, and the 7:14 Friday evening in mid-autumn when I finally walked into my own kitchen and said the thing I should have said 3 months earlier. I thought about my mother. I thought about my sister. I thought about the unpaid debt I owed my wife for the years I hadn't yet figured out how to be the kind of husband she deserved. I thought about Atlas, asleep in his crib, finally hearing the world clearly. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep. I lay there until my wife woke up. She turned over. She looked at me. She said, "You were up with him." I said, "Yeah," she said. "How long?" I said. "About an hour, thank you." I said, "Leela." She said, "Yeah." I said, "Don't thank me. I'm going to be the one getting up with him from now on. You sleep." She looked at me for a long time. She smiled. She did not say anything else. She closed her eyes. She went back to sleep. What did you tolerate in your own house for too long? And what was the moment that finally made you say enough? Comment your answer below. One sentence is enough. I read every single one. Some men reading this tonight have been married to women who have been carrying quietly the kind of weight that a husband should have been carrying alongside her. Some of those men have known they should have been carrying more of it. Some of those men have not been carrying more of it because the work of confronting a mother, a sister, a brother, a father, an in-law, or a cousin. The work of saying the thing that would have to be said out loud in a kitchen to a person who has known the husband since he was a boy is the kind of work that is harder than the work of pretending nothing is happening. The pretending is easier. The pretending is always easier until it isn't. Until you walk into your own kitchen on a Friday evening in mid-autumn and you see your wife standing at the stove with your sick child on her hip and a wooden spoon in her hand, and you finally see what you've been letting happen. And you understand, in the careful, private accounting of a man who has been pretending for too long, that the work of saying the thing out loud is not actually as hard as the work of continuing to pretend. Tell me in the comments tonight what you have been tolerating for too long. Tell me the moment that finally made you say enough. Tell me, if you have not yet said it, when you are going to. I will read every single answer.